What happened to the leaders at the end of World War II? Much of this information is inexhaustive as the Second World War was wildly complex. But if it does interest you, I recommend looking into things further, using the good old internet, or your local library. For this video, we will focus on the most prominent heads of the most prominent nations during the final year of World War II, 1945. The Second World War had two main sides, the Alliance and the Axis powers. Let's start with the Axis nations. Mussolini. Benito Mussolini was the prime minister and dictator of fascist Italy and leader of the Italian National Fascist Party, or the Partito Nazionale Fascista. In June 1940 he took Italy into the war, allying with Hitler's Nazi Germany. But only 3 years later he was deposed and arrested due to the Allied invasion of Sicily. Italy signed the Armistice of Cassibile on the 3rd of September 1943, ending hostilities between them and the Allies, only for Mussolini to be broken out of captivity by Nazi special forces on the 12th of September. For a while, he hung about in northern Italy as head of the Italian Social Republic, a German puppet state set up by Hitler. However, the Allies, along with Italian resistance, kept advancing upward through Italy. After hiding out in Milan and getting news of the German forces in Italy's imminent surrender, Mussolini fled the city further north on the 25th of April 1945. 2 days later, he was discovered by local communist partisans amongst a convoy near the village of Dongo. Accounts differ on exactly when or by whom the orders for his execution were given, but sometime during the morning of the 28th of April 1945, Mussolini and his mistress were executed by shooting. That evening, the body of Mussolini and his mistress were bunged into a van with the bodies of other executed fascists and taken to Milan, where they were beaten ruthlessly by crowds and hung up by their feet for display. Hitler. Adolf Hitler was the leader of Nazi Germany and primary belligerent of the Second World War. By 1945, himself and other senior Nazi personnel had hunkered in their bunker in Berlin, while the Allied forces steadily encroached on their position. By the 23rd of April 1945, the Soviet Red Army had encircled Berlin. To make matters worse, by the 28th of April, Hermann Göring declared himself de facto leader in Hitler's absence, while Heinrich Himmler had fled and attempted to negotiate a surrender with the Allies. Compounded by the news of Mussolini's fate, Hitler saw this as the perfect time for a romantic gesture and married his mistress Eva Braun. By this point, his decision to completely evade capture was final, and with Soviet troops just hundreds of meters away, Hitler and his new boo killed themselves by shooting and cyanide poisoning. Their bodies were then taken outside and burnt in a bomb crater. The topic of Hitler's remains is still debated, with some saying they were exhumed or moved by the Soviets, but there is minimal evidence either way. This led to his death certificate not being officially issued until 1956. Hirohito. Emperor Hirohito was the longest reigning emperor of Japan, and was said to have taken a keen interest in the Second World War, holding frequent meetings with the prime ministerial cabinet throughout the conflict. But by 1945, the chances of victory for Japan against the Eastern Allied forces had worsened significantly. The USSR refused to renew their neutrality agreement in April, and Germany surrendered in May. Morale was low among the Japanese populace, exacerbated by the atomic bombings of Nagasaki and Hiroshima by the US. Fears of a coup materialized on the 14th of August, but failed. Japan unconditionally surrendered later the same month, with a high majority of Allied citizens wanting to see Hirohito tried as a war criminal. However, US General Douglas MacArthur wanted to keep Hirohito, seeing him as symbolic of Japanese continuity, and therefore useful towards a peaceful transition to the Allied occupation. As a result, any evidence linking Hirohito to the actions of the Japanese during the conflict were excluded from the Tokyo War Crimes Tribunal in 1946. Instead, Prime Minister Hideki Tojo accepted full responsibility. This was only after trying to shoot himself in the heart and missing after he heard of the Japanese surrender and his imminent arrest. Tojo was resuscitated by American soldiers and later sentenced to death and hanged on the 23rd of December 1948. Hirohito, however, remained as a figurehead and head of state for Japan until he died from cancer on the 7th of January 1989 at the age of 87. Now, for the Allied leaders. Churchill. Winston Churchill was the Prime Minister of Great Britain and leader of the Conservative Party from 1940 to 1945. He presided over the final year of the Second World War, including the acceptance by Allied powers of Germany's surrender on the 7th of May, 1945, and the subsequent celebration of Victory in Europe Day on the 8th. Addressing the crowds from the window of Buckingham Palace, Churchill was serenaded for his victory, and correctly asserted the eventual surrender of Japan in a radio broadcast later that same evening. Due to him being the head of a wartime coalition between various political parties, and with Labour refusing to continue the coalition in the face of an upcoming general election, Churchill resigned as Prime Minister on the 23rd of May. He was then reappointed in a caretaker role on the 28th of May, during which time he was the British representative at the Potsdam Conference for planning post-war peace in Europe. Churchill then resigned as Prime Minister again on the 26th of July, after losing to Clement Attlee and the first majority Labour government. Churchill remained as leader of the opposition to the Labour government, leading the Conservatives to victory in the 1951 general election. Churchill was in office until his resignation on the 5th of April, 1955. He then remained as a Member of Parliament until the 1964 general election. He died from a stroke on the 24th of January, 1965. FDR. Franklin Delano Roosevelt was the President of the United States of America, elected in 1933. He served a standard 2 terms before winning an unprecedented 3rd term in 1940, eventually taking the USA into the Second World War following the attack on the Hawaiian military base in Pearl Harbor on the 7th of December, 1941. He oversaw the deployment of U.S. troops firstly into the successful North African campaign, then into numerous European campaigns, as well as the expansion into the Eastern theater of war, fighting primarily against the Japanese. Back home, there were calls for more emphasis on fighting the Japanese, with Roosevelt prioritizing the defeat of Germany. Eventually, the Battle of Leyte Gulf in late October 1944, one of the largest naval battles in history, decimated much of the Japanese naval forces, with the U.S. reclaiming much of their lost territory in the Pacific by April 1945. By this point, however, Roosevelt's health had declined significantly. Already crippled from polio, he was also a heavy smoker with numerous other health issues. His aides were able to keep his illnesses mostly secret during his tenure, often dressing his wheelchair in cloth to keep it hidden for portraits. He was limited to 4 hours of work per day as a result of his poor health. On April 12, 1945, while sitting for a portrait, Roosevelt announced, "I have a terrific headache," before slumping forward in his chair and dying from a massive brain hemorrhage. He was 63. His vice president, Harry S. Truman, was sworn in that day as president. Truman oversaw the final months of the Second World War, including the realization of the Roosevelt-funded Manhattan Project, with the atomic bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki finally leading to the Japanese surrender in September 1945. Stalin. Joseph Stalin was the leader and general secretary of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, who came to power in 1924. Following the illness and death of the previous leader Vladimir Lenin in January of 1924, Stalin eventually ousted his co-leaders and consolidated power for himself, becoming supreme dictator of the Soviet Union. Stalin initially didn't want to bring the Soviet Union into the Second World War, and signed the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact with Germany in August 1939, a non-aggression treaty. Eventually, and despite many warnings about the German intentions, Germany invaded the Soviet Union on the 22nd of June, 1941, breaking the pact and maybe Stalin's heart. Subsequently, the Soviet Union joined with the Allied powers against Nazi Germany and the Axis forces. After pushing back German advances, the Red Army seized Berlin in April 1945, leading to Hitler's demise. Originally, Stalin wanted Hitler captured alive, but instead ordered for his remains to be brought back to the Soviet Union to avoid them becoming a point of worship for Nazi fanatics. With the Nazis defeated, Stalin diverted troops east, invading Japanese-occupied Manchuria on the 8th of August, 1945, leading to their eventual surrender. After the war, the Potsdam Conference of the Axis powers concluded a division of Germany and Berlin between the USSR, the US, the British, and the French. Due to his success, Stalin had cemented himself as a symbol of victory across the Soviet Union, and his cult of personality was growing, emphasized heavily by the state themselves. But as his health began to deteriorate, he grew cautious of those who would seek to oust him. His oppressive nature and paranoia grew, leading to famines, cults, and an increasingly intense police state cracking down harshly on anyone who could be seen as a dissident. On March 5, 1953, he died of a brain hemorrhage. He was embalmed and laid to rest alongside Lenin in the mausoleum in Red Square, eventually being moved in 1961 into the Kremlin Wall necropolis. Right, that's all for now. If you'd like to hear about the other leaders of World War II, let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching. I'm a sandwich.